Welcome to the Wild West, a place often depicted as a lawless and desolate frontier. But beneath the surface of this stereotype lies a more vibrant and nuanced reality. In truth, the Wild West was a vast, untamed expanse, stretching from the Mississippi River to the Pacific coast, encompassing deserts, mountains, and prairies. It was a land of endless possibilities, where audacious pioneers sought a fresh start, staking their claims under the vast, open sky. But contrary to the popular image of ghost towns and tumbleweeds, the frontier towns of the Wild West were anything but deserted. From saloons and general stores to blacksmith shops and schools, these towns were bustling hubs of activity, teeming with life and the unceasing hum of humanity. They were melting pots of different cultures, where settlers from all walks of life crossed paths and intertwined their destinies. So, the Wild West was far from being a ghost town. It was teeming with life and activity, and the image of the cowboy is deeply ingrained in the Wild West folklore. But was it as glamorous as we imagine? The cowboy, that iconic image of the Wild West, is often pictured as a rugged hero riding into the sunset after a long day of herding cattle and maintaining law and order. But behind the romanticized image lies a harsh reality. The life of a cowboy was far from the glitzy Hollywood portrayal. Picture this: long, grueling hours in the saddle, under the scorching sun or in the biting cold, with only the open plains as your companion. They herded cattle over vast distances, a job fraught with perils such as stampedes, rustlers, and treacherous river crossings. It was a life of isolation, far from the comforts and conveniences we take for granted today. Yet, it wasn't all hardship. There were moments of camaraderie around the campfire, tales spun under the starlit sky, and the unparalleled freedom of the open range. A cowboy's life was simple, yet it demanded resilience, quick thinking, and a deep respect for the land and the animals in their charge. Despite the hardships, the spirit of the cowboy embodies the resilience and rugged individualism of the Wild West. Their legacy lives on, not just in the stories we tell, but in the values they represented: respect for nature, a strong work ethic, and an unwavering determination to face whatever challenges the frontier presented. They were the embodiment of the Wild West's heart and soul. The Wild West was a stage for some of history's most notorious outlaws and revered lawmen. It was a time when law and order were still trying to find their footing, and this struggle gave birth to legends that continue to captivate us today. Take Jesse James, for instance. He was a Confederate guerrilla during the Civil War, who turned to a life of crime afterwards. Hailed by some as a Robin Hood figure, robbing from the rich and giving to the poor, he was also feared as a ruthless killer. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Then we have Billy the Kid, a name that has become synonymous with youthful lawlessness. He was said to have killed 21 men, one for each year of his short life, although the actual number was probably far less. And who can forget Wyatt Earp, the lawman who became a legend following the infamous gunfight at the OK Corral? But Earp's life was far more complex and arguably less heroic than the stories suggest. These men, and many like them, lived in a time when law and order were often in direct conflict. Were they villains or heroes? That's a question that's been debated for over a century and a half. Whether heroes or villains, these figures have etched their names in the annals of Wild West history. Their stories, complex and often shrouded in myth, continue to shape our understanding of this fascinating era. The Native American cultures were the original inhabitants of the Wild West, long before the cowboys and outlaws. Let's take a moment to honor the first people of the Wild West. The Native American cultures thrived for centuries before the arrival of European settlers. These diverse groups, from the Navajo to the Sioux, the Apache to the Cheyenne, each had their unique traditions, languages, and ways of life. They were the true masters of the untamed frontier, understanding and respecting the land in ways that the settlers could scarcely comprehend. However, the arrival of settlers brought significant challenges for these indigenous people. The Wild West era was a time of struggle and conflict for Native American tribes. As settlers pushed westward, the Native American ways of life were threatened. Land was seized, treaties were broken, and entire cultures were on the brink of extinction. It was a dark chapter in the history of the American West, one that we must remember and learn from. But it's also important to celebrate the resilience and strength of these cultures. Despite the hardships, Native American tribes held on to their traditions, passing them down from generation to generation. Today, their vibrant cultures continue to enrich the American tapestry. Their stories are a vital part of the Wild West tapestry, adding depth and diversity to this fascinating era. Their voices echo through the canyons and across the plains, reminding us that the Wild West was, and always will be, their home too. The promise of gold created a fever that transformed the landscape of the Wild West. The Gold Rush era, beginning in the mid-19th century, was a time of immense change, hope, and often sheer desperation. Prospectors, lured by the siren call of wealth, poured into the West, their dreams shining as brightly as the precious metal they sought. These hopeful miners didn't come alone. They were followed by merchants, saloon keepers, entertainers, and a whole host of other folk looking to make their fortune from the miners' hard-earned gold dust. And so, the boom towns were born, sprouting like wildflowers after a spring rain. These towns were a whirlwind of activity, filled with the hustle and bustle of daily life. Yet for all their promise, these boom towns were often ephemeral. When the gold ran out, so did the people. The once thriving towns, pulsating with life and laughter, were abandoned, left to the mercy of the elements. The saloons fell silent, the stores closed, and the streets, once thrumming with energy, were deserted. These ghost towns, as they came to be known, stand as stark reminders of the fleeting nature of fortune. The gold rush was a defining chapter, driving ambition and sometimes recklessness in the Wild West story. It was a time of dreams and despair, of riches won and lost, a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who dare to chase the glimmer of gold. Hollywood has played a significant role in shaping our perception of the Wild West. The silver screen has been a canvas upon which the myths and legends of this era have been painted, often with broad strokes. From the epic adventures of John Wayne to the gritty realism of Clint Eastwood, filmmakers have spun tales that have captivated audiences worldwide. Hollywood has depicted the Wild West as a place of endless gunfights, saloon brawls, and daring horse chases. It's given us the image of the cowboy as a fearless hero, the outlaw as a charming rogue, and the frontier town as a bustling hub of activity. But the reality was often far different. Gunfights were rare, most cowboys were hard-working ranch hands, and frontier towns were as likely to be quiet and peaceful as they were wild and lawless. Hollywood's version of the Wild West also often glossed over the harsh conditions, the struggle for survival, and the cultural clashes that were part of everyday life in this era. Moreover, the portrayal of Native Americans in these films has often been problematic, with stereotypes and inaccuracies abounding. Thankfully, more recent productions have started to challenge these misrepresentations and offer more nuanced portrayals. So while Hollywood's Wild West might be more entertaining, it's not always historically accurate. As the 19th century closed, the era of the Wild West started to fade. This wasn't an abrupt end, but rather a gradual transformation shaped by various factors. One of the key elements that contributed to the closing of this chapter was the expansion of the railroad. With the iron horse galloping across the plains, the once vast and untamed frontier began to shrink. The railroad brought change, connectivity, and a new wave of settlers who were drawn by the promise of a better life. But it wasn't just the railroad that tamed the Wild West. It was also the relentless march of progress. The lawless frontier towns began to establish structured law and order. The days of outlaws and gunslingers were numbered as sheriffs and marshals became a more common sight. This period also saw the decline of the cattle drives, a symbol of the cowboy era. The advent of barbed wire fencing and the expansion of farming meant that the open range was disappearing. The cowboy, once the heart and soul of the West, was becoming a figure of the past. But as one chapter ended, another began. The spirit of the Wild West didn't die, it evolved, finding new life in the burgeoning industries of the 20th century. The Wild West may have ended, but its spirit and legends continue to captivate us. It's a testament to the enduring allure of this fascinating period in American history.